Comprehensible input is the real engine of fluency. Here's the shocking part. Grammar books are not what make you fluent. Understanding is. Your brain doesn't learn a language by memorizing rules. It learns by absorbing thousands of hours of input that it can almost fully understand. That's called comprehensible input, and it's the single biggest predictor of real fluency. Most learners waste years drilling verb conjugations while ignoring the one thing that actually rewires their brain, listening and reading content that's just slightly above their level. Think about how you learned your first language. Nobody handed you a grammar workbook at age 2. You listened, you absorbed patterns, and one day the words just came out correctly without you ever studying a rule. That's not a coincidence. That's how the human brain is wired to acquire language. The fastest learners flood themselves with input: podcasts, YouTube videos, audiobooks, TV shows, articles, anything that keeps them curious enough to keep going. The trick is choosing content you'd actually want to watch even in your own language, because motivation keeps input flowing, and input is what builds intuition. Grammar has its place, but it should support your understanding, not replace it. If you're spending more time studying rules than consuming real content, you're doing it backwards, and that one shift alone can cut your timeline to fluency in half. Speaking from day one beats waiting to be ready. Nobody is ever ready to speak a new language, and waiting for that feeling is the biggest trap learners fall into. Here's the shocking truth. The people who become fluent fastest are usually the ones who sound the worst in the beginning because they started speaking immediately, mistakes and all. Silence doesn't build fluency, output does. Every time you force a sentence out of your mouth, even a broken one, you're strengthening a neural pathway that passive study can never touch. Perfectionism is the silent killer of language learning. Learners convince themselves they need 6 more months of vocabulary before they deserve to speak, and that 6 months turns into 2 years of never speaking at all. Fluency isn't a reward you unlock after enough preparation. It's a skill you build through repeated, imperfect attempts. Find a language partner, talk to yourself in the mirror, record voice notes, join a conversation exchange, anything that gets your mouth physically producing the language under real pressure. The discomfort you feel is not a sign you're doing it wrong, it's a sign you're doing it right, because growth in language learning almost always feels uncomfortable before it feels natural. The learners who embarrass themselves early are, ironically, the ones who end up sounding the most natural later, because they stopped treating speaking like a final exam and started treating it like practice. Build a personal immersion bubble. You don't need to move abroad to immerse yourself. You need to rebuild your daily environment so the target language surrounds you constantly, and that's a shocking shift most people never make. Change your phone's language settings. Switch your music, your podcasts, your default YouTube recommendations. Follow social media accounts that post only in the language you're learning. Within weeks, your brain starts treating the language as normal background noise instead of a special study mode activity, and that changes everything. Immersion isn't about geography, it's about frequency and normalization. The learners who progress fastest are the ones who make the language impossible to avoid, not the ones who schedule 1 hour of study and then live the other 23 hours in their native tongue. Label objects in your house. Think through your daily to-do list in the new language. Narrate your actions in your head as you cook or drive. This constant low-effort exposure compounds far more than an intense but isolated study session ever could, because your brain craves repetition and context, not isolated bursts of information. The goal is to make the language part of your identity, not a subject you occasionally visit. Once your environment does the work for you, motivation stops being the bottleneck, because you're no longer relying on willpower, you're relying on habit, and habit always wins in the long run. Consistency crushes intensity. Here's a number that shocks most learners. 20 minutes a day for a year will take you further than a single 8-hour cram session ever could. Because language learning is a compounding skill, not a one-time achievement. Your brain needs repeated spaced exposure to move information from short-term memory into long-term fluency, and that only happens through consistency. People love the idea of an intense immersion weekend, but the truth is, the brain forgets almost everything it doesn't revisit within days. Small daily contact with the language keeps neural pathways active, while long gaps between sessions force your brain to relearn material from scratch every single time. This is why the learners who show up every day, even for just 15 minutes, consistently outperform the ones who binge study once a week for hours. Consistency also builds identity. When you practice daily, you start seeing yourself as someone who is learning this language. And that identity shift fuels motivation on the days you don't feel like practicing. Missing one day isn't the problem. The danger is letting one missed day turn into a week, then a month, then abandoning the language altogether. Set a ridiculously small daily minimum you can never say no to. 5 minutes, one video, one page. Because showing up matters far more than how much you do once you're there. Discipline beats motivation every time, and small daily wins are what actually rewire your brain for fluency. Shadowing trains your mouth, not just your brain. Most learners obsess over vocabulary and grammar, completely ignoring the muscles in their own mouth, and that oversight is shockingly common. Speaking a language fluently isn't just a mental skill, it's a physical one. Your tongue, lips, and jaw need to physically adapt to sounds and rhythms that may not exist in your native language, and that only happens through repetition. This is where shadowing becomes a secret weapon. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say almost simultaneously, copying their pronunciation, their intonation, their speed, even their pauses. It feels awkward at first, almost like acting, but that awkwardness is exactly where the magic happens. Within weeks of consistent shadowing, learners notice their accent softening, their sentences flowing more naturally, and their listening comprehension improving dramatically because shadowing trains your ear and your mouth at the same time. Choose a short audio clip, maybe 30 seconds, and shadow it repeatedly until it feels automatic, then move to a new clip. This isn't about understanding every word immediately. It's about training your mouth to produce unfamiliar